When Governor Mike DeWine signed into law a ban on cell phones in K-12 schools June 30th.
Our children in Ohio are better off with no cell phones during the day.
Ohio jumped on the bandwagon of 35 other states that have passed similar legislation. It began in Florida in 2023.
Starting tomorrow, a slew of new laws will take effect across Florida, including a cell phone ban in some schools.
That's right.
Then steadily gained traction.
A new law is forcing school districts to ban cell phones in Texas classrooms effective immediately.
South Carolina school districts now required to ban cell phones during school hours.
And conservative states weren't the only ones voting for the restrictions.
This issue is a rare instance of bipartisanship, uniting state leaders on both sides of the political aisle.
California is the latest state to restrict the use of smartphones in schools. Governor Gavin Newsom signed the Phone-Free School Act, requiring every school district and charter schools to come up with a policy to ban the devices by 2026.
Lawmakers are finally backing what teachers have been saying for years. These phones have become little dopamine slot machines in kids' pockets.
And educators there have come to lawmakers with kind of glowing testimonials. And teachers were like, this has been transformational. This has been amazing. This has been the best thing that we have ever done in this district. And so educators at least seem to really, really love it.
Some teachers and Ohio State alumni whose districts began instituting bans last year are also big proponents.
I loved it. I did see an improvement on engagement and students paying attention to the things that they needed to learn.
Yet little research has been done on the effectiveness of phone bans. Will students' academic performance and mental health improve when phones go away for just 6 hours a day? Or will it take a larger cultural shift? Will children, like so many adults, never learn to control the impulse to check out of their surroundings and zombie scroll when they get bored or anxious? Upcoming bans could be the perfect petri dish for studying the strategy. In this episode of the Ohio State University Inspire podcast, we talked to two researchers who hope to seize that moment, but who have for years studied another group that also can't seem to manage digital distractions: college students.
If you ask any college instructor to describe some of the biggest challenges they have in the classroom, this would come up. Everybody knows this is a huge challenge that college instructors and K-12 teachers are facing, this integration of technology into the classroom in a way that prompts misuse of devices.
We know that off-task smartphone use occurs about once every 5 minutes for most students. I could keep spitting those statistics at you, but basically we've seen that the way that higher education is approaching the issue of digital distraction, it ain't working.
We talked to Ohio teachers about the new ban, and we get tips from the interim director of Ohio State's Dennis Learning Center, who teaches college students to self-regulate distractions inside and outside of class. You'll want to hear her concern that policymakers and school administrators might not be anticipating.
Students who are used to having a phone and used to being connected get really anxious when they're not able to check their phone.
Can classroom environments be saved from digital distractions? And what lessons does this moment provide to anyone thinking about unhooking their brains from electronic devices? I'm Robin Chenoweth. This is the Ohio State University Inspire podcast. Inspire is a production of the College of Education and Human Ecology. Anyone who owns a smartphone knows the gravitational pull digital devices have on the human brain. Our societal preoccupation with smartphones years ago found its way into the classroom. A study in the Journal of the American Medical Association Pediatrics this year found that middle and high school students spend 90 minutes, or 27% of the school day, on their phones. And here's the thing: they don't stop when they graduate. Because phone use in college classrooms has been better studied than in K-12 schools. Kids weren't supposed to have phones in class, right? We'll start on college campuses.
My name's Anna Brady. I am an assistant professor here at Georgia Southern University. I started at Georgia Southern in 2021, which is the same year that I graduated from Ohio State with a PhD in educational studies with a specialization in educational psychology.
My name's Abe Flanagan. I'm an associate professor of educational psychology at Georgia Southern University.
While I was a PhD student at Ohio State, I worked in the Dennis Learning Center, which is, of course, connected to the College of Education and Human Ecology. I taught the Learning to Learn course, and then I also was an academic coach for undergraduates and graduate students. And it was really evident to me through both of those roles that technology was a huge issue for students, figuring out how to manage technology in the classroom, but then also outside of the classroom. We did this coding where we were looking at the distractions that were prevalent as students were working on academic tasks and how they worked to control those distractions. And technology emerged in that research. And so I was super excited when I started as a faculty member at Georgia Southern. And Abe was already here doing this sort of work.
American youth spend 1.5 hours on their smartphones during the school day. Now, you both study college students. Do you think that number might even be worse for them?
If they have a smartphone, most college students spend about a third of a typical class period misusing that device, the smartphone, for off-task purposes. A typical laptop user spends about 50% of a typical class period misusing their laptop.
Wow, so it's even worse for a laptop.
Yeah, and then you've got students who don't just bring their laptop, they bring both devices. And there's been some scholars who have kind of coined this term double dosage, where laptop users are at risk of that double dosage of digital distraction because they've got the laptop and the smartphone.
In a recent article that Abe and I published that he was lead author on, we also found that this was consistent outside of the United States. So we found through self-report data that students in Turkey spend about 36% of their class time on misusing digital devices, and South Korea is about 32%. So I think this issue is especially interesting because it's not just an issue that affects students in the United States. You know, this is an issue that is impacting everybody who has access to these smart devices.
Are there any statistics that show how distraction impacts academic performance or any other research?
I could pull out a stack of correlational studies that have shown that the amount of time spent misusing a device during class is negatively impacted with reductions in course grades and GPAs. And so those kinds of correlational regressional studies have shown that the amount of time spent misusing devices is a significant predictor of academic achievement. When I was doing my postdoc at Ohio University, we did a study where we had students listen to a lecture, and half the students were taking notes, no exposure to distractions, and then the other half were responding to incoming text messages while the lecture was ongoing. And we found that the students who responded to the incoming text messages took fewer notes and did about 8% worse on the post-test than the students who weren't exposed to the distractions. And so 8% is almost a full letter grade.
And that was just one class session, Flanagan says. It would be difficult to assess, but imagine if you extrapolate that over an entire semester or grading period. It's not a big leap to make for the high school teachers we interviewed. A reminder here that their comments are their own and do not necessarily represent the opinions of the districts where they work. Amy Stamper has taught reading and language arts in Ohio since she graduated from the college's teaching and learning program in 1990. She has seen a progression in electronic device distractions throughout her career. Stamper now teaches reading to 9th graders at Fairborn High School near Dayton.
A large part of reading is what's going on in your mind as you're reading. And you can't do that if their attention is split with something that's buzzing in their pocket or they're just dying to get back to a game on their Chromebook. If you have trouble reading, you don't want to read. So you're going to do whatever you can to avoid doing that thing that's uncomfortable for you. Typically, those types of students need to focus more, but when they have technology readily available and they know how to be clandestine, they're going to choose that over something that's difficult for them. Most kids between 7th and 9th grade don't have that self-control. And so it was just a constant drain on their attention, constant drain on them, as you said, being engaged.
Alumni board member Cassie Sunderhouse graduated from Ohio State's teaching and learning program in 2024. Being a part of Gen Z, which last year spent an average of 6 to 7 hours a day on their phones. Sunderhouse understands how enmeshed with technology her students can be. She teaches 9th grade biology at Columbus Alternative High School.
Some topics in bio are really interesting, and students are intrigued and they're excited, and so it's way easier to get them to engage. Other topics are memorization, and it's not as interesting. When you're talking about the cell organelles, it's really hard to get students to engage in that. And so I do feel like sometimes it's a fight with phones because what I have to say sometimes isn't as exciting as what's on their phone.
You're in competition.
It's just an addiction. And so it's a competition, but it feels like a competition that I'm not going to win. No matter how eager I am or excited I am or how awesome the lesson is. Some students, it's just an addiction. And so it's like a part of their body. Like they just can't put it down.
And what did you do when you found yourself in those situations? How did you try to redirect?
I had a lot of conversations with my students. I came at it from an approach of, I grew up with phones like you did, and I don't love using it, and here's why. And so I think there was almost a relationship piece there too. If I had a good relationship with my students and I trusted them and they trusted me, they were more willing to listen and say, oh, what she has to say is more important than what's on my phone. But that didn't seem to be successful until later in the year. I think there needed to be some months of dialogue there.
Most educational psychologists agree that this approach, teaching students to self-regulate their phone use, is critical. Taking phones away is an external motivator. But kids only spend so many hours a day in school. The real growth comes when students are motivated to put phones away on their own volition. When Sunderhouse explains to students why she's falling out of love with her smartphone, she's appealing to their sense of self-protection. Still, at the start of school last year, she asked students to leave their phones in a caddy in front of the class. It didn't go as well as she hoped.
I was big on collaboration, and in my head, I thought, oh, if my students are talking to each other, they don't need to talk to anyone else on their phone. They don't need any other stimulation. But I think I've noticed that students don't socialize well. And that's very different from my personal experience growing up. As soon as I told them to put their phones away, they don't know how to interact with each other.
Stanford psychiatrist Anna Lemke says compulsive use of digital devices can leach people of their creativity and energy. With excessive use, she says, the supercharged pseudo-reality that phones offer causes the release into the brain of large quantities of dopamine, a neurotransmitter linked to pleasure and reward. This doesn't just happen when we're active on our phones, other research points out. Over time, merely feeling a vibration from your phone can trigger a dopamine release. When students try to re-enter the real world, their classroom or the prospect of doing homework, the brain tries to adapt by plunging into a dopamine deficit state, a downswing that takes them below their natural baseline for dopamine. Bored and anxious, they might reach again for their phone. It's important to note that critics of this theory argue that dopamine is not the sole driver of addictive behavior, and that more neuroscientific research needs to be done. But teachers we spoke to agree that phone use saps students' interest in their peers and discourages them from practicing skills that might get them interacting again.
When phones are out or accessible, it's easy for students to check out.
Jim Cottle earned his master's in teaching from the college in 2014 and teaches high school social studies in Hilliard City Schools. He doesn't think phones have distracted his students from learning as much as they have kept them from learning to deal with uncomfortable situations. Again, these views are his, not the district's. Do you feel like it has impacted students' ability to interact with each other?
To simply put, yes, I do. I think the peer-to-peer connection or the group work, the students interacting with each other, I think that's a huge piece that phones allow kids to miss out on. That's what part of the high school experience is. The students need to learn how to talk to other peers, get ready to talk to adults. They need to, not only that, but they've kind of got to be a little uncomfortable with their learning, right? They need to be able to sit kind of with the material or with the content or with whatever the day's activities are. And when the phones are there, it allows them to, I guess, like I said, kind of check out. They can skip that uncomfortable piece. They can skip the awkwardness and just say, I'm not going to do this. So I think those are skills that students need to develop. And so, yeah, phones definitely put kind of a limit on that.
Of course, not all students check out in class or don't engage with peers. But the ones who do aren't alone in this behavior. Jackie Von Spiegel is interim director of Ohio State's Dennis Learning Center, which coaches undergraduates and teaches evidence-based learning strategies to students at Ohio State.
It is a habit, a very ingrained, easy habit that we all have of just, oh, I have a brief moment of my mind is not occupied, let me check my phone. We often use our digital distractions in a semi-intentional way to distract us from any negative emotions that we're having, any boredom or anxiety or frustration. And this happens to students frequently. What's the first thing that they do to manage that boredom? Maybe before smartphones, we might kind of looked around or we doodled or maybe chatted with a friend in class. None of those things are great either, but you could still hear you're not really distracting yourself with incoming information. The thing about smartphones and these kind of digital distractions is that the incoming information is really incompatible with paying attention in class. So you can do one or the other. You really can't do both at the same time. Students have always had trouble paying attention in class. That's not new, but the methods that they're using to deal with that boredom or to manage their attention is actually more harmful. It's a very common misconception that we think that we're multitasking. We're doing two things at once. I'm just checking my phone while I'm listening to my teacher talk. I can do both at once. No, you can't, because they're on the same pathway in your brain. You're processing language. And so you can do one or the other, but you can't do both.
I asked researchers Anna Brady and Abe Flanagan about how the mind processes information. In general, we fall for that myth that we can multitask. But our brains haven't evolved that much, have they?
The thought that I'm capable of doing two things at once and I can do both of them well because I am a capable, competent person. I listen to classroom lectures all the time. I text on my phone all the time, so I should be able to do both of these things at the same time. But we know that multitasking is a myth. That's not how the brain works. The brain and selective attention doesn't focus on and process more than one thing at a given time. Our working memory is a pretty limited resource that we need to be able to allocate towards whatever it is that we're trying to learn. And if we are on our devices or if we're watching a movie on our laptop during class, we are directing those working memory resources away from whatever it is that we need to be focused on. And so we're going to miss it. We're not going to internalize it.
Reorienting your mind back to a lecture or Zoom meeting might take the same amount of time you spent wandering off. A few seconds or several minutes, Flanagan said. But if you're doing something more involved, like writing a paper, getting back on track is even harder. Jackie Von Spiegel.
You're trying to re-engage and produce language, working on a homework assignment if you're a student, or writing a paper, things like that, to re-engage and get back on track. Usually there's a concentration cycle.
A concentration cycle. The first 10 minutes involve light concentration.
Where you're easily distracted and any little noise and things are popping in your head, and it can be hard to stay focused on what you're doing. After 10 minutes, you're in kind of medium concentration where you're mostly focused on the task that you're doing. Every now and then, you're going to have a little bit more things pop up, but it's easier to stay focused.
Now you're in deep concentration. Your fingers are tapping the keyboard. Your thoughts are in the right groove. You're hitting your stride.
After those 20 minutes, sometimes you might get into flow state where distractions aren't even bothering you. All you're thinking about is the task.
But if your phone vibrates and you choose to get off task and check it, boom, you hit bottom and you have to go through the whole concentration cycle. All over again.
Back to my work. Where was I? What was I thinking about? What was I doing?
Sound familiar? Maybe it shouldn't surprise us that one study found the prevalence rates of smartphone overuse are higher among adults than they are for adolescents and children. Teachers we interviewed and those surveyed by Pew Research and other organizations feel that smartphone bans can help limit the distractions that their students face on the daily. Cassie Sunderhouse.
I would honestly say that the majority of my cohort or my teacher friends would be in favor of it. The grasp that phones have on us now is an issue, and I think it's definitely getting in the way of learning. Like, I don't want phones in the picture. I can work with a student and build relationships with them and help them to interact with each other and learn the content along the way. But if I'm fighting with the phone, it makes it 10 times harder.
Amy Stamper's school began using locked electronic pouches last year after initial restrictions for phone use were put into place.
We had policies and we had rules and we had consequences if students got caught using their phone. It was still a rampant problem. It had a heavier punch when the governor came down and said every school district has to have a policy. And so it was more formal in the eyes of families and students.
What did you see with your students? Did it become easier to manage the class, and are they doing better?
I had a record year this year with growth. So
Really?
There were probably other factors. Typically, I would say I would have 30 to 33% go up as much as they should, their expected growth. And this year I had 49%.
Wow.
So it's a big jump.
That's a pretty significant amount.
Mm-hmm.
But some argue that the bans don't go far enough. Again, what happens at the end of the school day when students get their phones back? And are we prepared for the fallout when the bans take effect? Here's a social media post by a California teacher on the first day his school banned phones.
So we have these things called yonder pouches. You take a kid's phone and you lock it in the pouch and they can't get to their phone the entire day. It was like watching people at a detox center. Like the kids were banging their phones on the table and being like, I can't get it out.
Some experts caution that we should not pathologize everyday behavior. But other deprivation studies say that people can experience withdrawal symptoms when they cut back on digital device use.
This is the thing that should be interesting with the new K-12 legislation. Students who are used to having a phone, and when it is taken away, they get very anxious. They're still going to be distracted because they're anxious and they're bored. They might get angrier and not actually pay attention more, unfortunately. However, there are things that you can do as an instructor or maybe as a school system to ease that anxiety. Teachers or specialists at the K-12 schools really need to train the students on some other strategies. I mean, let's get back to doodling, I guess. But something to manage those emotions, because I do think there's going to be a lot of anxiety and they're not going to really know how to handle, what do I do when I'm bored? Because the boredom isn't going away.
Von Spiegel and Anna Brady co-wrote a book chapter about how college instructors can minimize stress over digital distractions in their classes.
We recommend, based on the research that we found, modeling and scaffolding effective regulation for digital distractions. So instructors talking about how we also are digitally distracted, but I'm going to put my phone away. Okay, now's the time. Let's all put our phones away.
Drawing up classroom agreements with students about when device use is acceptable is helpful. Dialogue is key.
Especially in the classes that we teach at the Dennis Learning Center, we talk about attention and concentration. So we need to actually have in-class discussions on distractions to really bring it to light, because we don't even realize that we're checking our phone. It's so habitual. So we're trying to make it more explicit so that students are aware of the distractions that are in their life.
These conversations are critical for teaching students to self-regulate, the greater goal. Anna Brady.
I hope that there are still opportunities for K-12 students to discuss the role of digital devices in their lives and think about distractions and problem solve with their teachers, strategies they can use, because I worry that if the devices aren't present, that's no longer a conversation. And I'm imagining a scenario where like a high schooler has their device out and they're using it and their teacher takes it away and punishes them and doesn't have that important conversation of like, why does this policy exist? Why is it so important that we remove these devices from the classroom?
Do you talk to students at all about how being distracted by digital media can affect their grades?
Yes.
What do you tell them?
I would actually say we focus more on the time management and stress management because it's more short-term impact. If you're easily distracted, you're not going to start and actually get focused for a long time. So you might be late, you might have to pull an all-nighter. That's a lot of stress. That's not good time management, right? And students are so stressed right now that really tapping into how we can help them ease their stress is a really important thing for them.
So it doesn't really help for you to say, hey, if you don't learn to put your phone down, you're going to get a lower grade.
It does hit them, but it doesn't help them in the short run.
Because they're too anxious.
They're too anxious, and it's too habitual. You need kind of more immediate consequences. Although it does impact their grades, it can. But they might have evidence to the contrary, especially now they're in college. They may have been using a smartphone all through high school during their classes, and they say, yeah, but I got along fine. I can multitask, it's fine. Whereas when they get challenged, it's not really fine.
Will a school day pause on smartphones and other devices be enough to mitigate the negative effects phones have on learning and socialization? Time will tell. But our experts agree truly changing smartphone consumption for students will take more than just bans. Amy Stamper.
Executive functioning skills are a very important part of life, and school alone can't teach those. I think that it would have to start with the parents and guardians.
We'll end on an interesting side note. Back to what Jackie Von Spiegel said about other strategies for handling boredom and anxiety. Might doodling make a comeback when phones are put away? Jim Cottle says yes.
So I actually have seen, since in my class the past couple of years, we've had them put away for actual class time. Doodling has gone way up. Even on the iPad, when they're taking notes or something, if they're submitting it, I can see they've got scribbles and pictures and things that I didn't see as much a couple years before.
Learn how doodling, fidgets, and strategic note-taking, not at all the kind that you learned, can help any mind engage and better grasp information, whether you're in school or just a lifelong learner. See the link to our story in the episode notes.